I watched my two teenage kids whispering in the corner of the kitchen, stealing glances at me and giggling like they were planning something ridiculous. Then my daughter Emma walked over with her phone in hand, a mischievous grin plastered across her face, and said the words that made my stomach drop. "Dad, we made you a dating profile. Your first date is Saturday night at Antonio's, 7 o'clock. Her name is Sarah, and you're going." I stood there frozen, spatula in hand, halfway through making scrambled eggs, wondering how my life had spiraled. So far out of my control that my own children were now scheduling my romantic life without permission. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to Soul Light Stories. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments about a time when something unexpected turned into a blessing. Your stories inspire us to keep sharing these heartwarming moments, and we'd love to hear from you. Now let me tell you how this wild journey unfolded. My name is David Chen, and I'm a 42-year-old high school history teacher living in suburban Portland, Oregon. For the past 4 years, ever since my wife Rebecca passed away from cancer, I'd been living in a carefully constructed routine built around two things: raising my kids and avoiding anything that reminded me of the gaping hole in my life. Emma was 16, sharp as a tack with her mother's wit and stubbornness. My son Jake was 14, quieter, but with an observant nature that often caught me off guard. Together, they'd apparently decided that watching their father eat, microwave dinners alone every night, while grading papers was no longer acceptable. The profile incident happened on a Tuesday morning. I'd been standing at the stove in my worn-out blazers, t-shirt, and flannel pajama pants, making breakfast before school when they ambushed me. Jake came around my other side, showing me the phone screen with a profile picture I didn't even remember them taking. It was from last summer at the coast, where I was actually smiling, wind in my hair, looking like someone who remembered what happiness felt like. "Absolutely not," I said, shaking my head so hard I'm surprised it didn't fall off. "Delete it now." But Emma crossed her arms in that way that reminded me so painfully of Rebecca, when she'd made up her mind about something. "Dad, you haven't been on a single date since Mom died?" "Not one. You just go to work, come home, help us with homework, and fall asleep watching documentaries about World War II. That's not living. That's just existing." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Jake nodded in agreement, his voice softer but equally determined. "We know you miss Mom. We miss her too every single day. But she wouldn't want you to be alone forever. Remember what she said in the hospital?" I did remember. I remembered every word Rebecca said in those final weeks. She'd grabbed my hand with what little strength she had left and made me promise to keep living, to let myself be happy again, to show our kids that love doesn't end when loss happens. But knowing what she wanted and actually doing it were two completely different things. "This is insane," I protested, but my voice had lost its conviction. "You can't just set up dates for your father like I'm some kind of project." Emma's eyes softened then, and she put her hand on my arm. "Dad, we already told her about us. Sarah knows you're a widower with 2 kids. She's a widow, too. She lost her husband 3 years ago. She has a daughter who's 15. And before you freak out more, she teaches English at Lincoln High, so you guys already have teaching in common." That stopped me cold. They'd actually put thought into this. It wasn't just some random swipe-right situation. They'd found someone who might actually understand the weird, complicated space I was living in. Still, the whole thing felt terrifying. I hadn't been on a date in nearly 20 years. I didn't even know what people talked about anymore. Did I need to learn about TikTok? Was I supposed to have opinions on cryptocurrency? The entire modern dating landscape felt like a foreign country, where I didn't speak the language. But as I looked at my kids, at their hopeful faces and their obvious concern for me, something shifted. They were trying to take care of me the same way I'd been taking care of them. And maybe, just maybe, they had a point. "Fine," I heard myself say, the word coming out before my brain could stop it. "One date. But if it's awful, you two are doing dishes for a month." The way they lit up, high-fiving each other and launching into plans for what I should wear. I realized I'd just agreed to something that absolutely terrified me. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and my kids' unsolicited dating advice. Emma took me shopping. Claiming every piece of clothing I owned made me look like a sad divorced math teacher, which was particularly insulting since I taught history. Jake researched conversation topics and actually printed out a list, which I found both touching and mortifying. By Saturday evening, I was standing in front of my bathroom, mirror in a blue button-down shirt that Emma had approved, dark jeans that didn't have any mysterious stains, and cologne that Jake had insisted didn't smell too old. "You look great, Dad," Emma said from my doorway, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "Mom would be proud of you." That almost undid me completely. I pulled her into a hug, then Jake joined us, and we stood there in a little family huddle, holding on to each other the way we had so many times over the past 4 years. "I love you guys," I managed to say. "Even though you're completely insane for doing this." Antonio's was a cozy Italian, place downtown with warm lighting and brick walls, covered in old photographs. I arrived 10 minutes early, which gave me plenty of time to sit in my car and contemplate whether faking a sudden illness was still an option. But then I saw her walking up to the entrance and something in my chest tightened. Sarah had brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, wearing a green dress that looked both elegant and comfortable. She was glancing around nervously, and I realized with a strange sense of relief that she was just as anxious as I was. I got out of the car and walked toward the restaurant, catching her eye as I approached. "Sarah?" I asked, and she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "David, hi. I have to tell you, my daughter Lily has been giving me a pep talk for the past hour. Apparently I'm supposed to just be myself and not talk about dead. People too much." I laughed, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly. My kids gave me a list of conversation topics. Number 3 is recent movies you've seen, which is hilarious because I can't remember the last time I saw anything that wasn't a Pixar film. We went inside and were seated at a corner table. And as we looked at our menus, I realized something surprising. This didn't feel as awkward as I'd feared. Maybe it was because we were both operating from the same playbook of grief and single parenting. Maybe it was because neither of us was pretending to be something we weren't. When the waiter came, we ordered pasta and wine, and then Sarah looked at me with a directness that I appreciated. "So our kids are master manipulators," she said. "Lily and her friend did the exact same thing to me. Set up the profile, found you, and basically gave me no choice but to show up tonight." "Wait," I said, processing this information. "Your daughter knows my kids?" Sarah nodded, clearly amused by my confusion. "Lily's best friend is Emma. They're in the same AP English class." Apparently, this entire thing was a coordinated operation between 3 teenagers who decided their single parents needed intervention. I sat back in my chair, completely stunned. This wasn't just a setup. This was a full-scale conspiracy, and somehow that made it even better. "I can't decide if I should ground Emma or thank her," I admitted. As dinner progressed, we talked about teaching, about our kids, about the strange experience of being widowed, and young enough that people expected you to just move on. Sarah told me about her husband Marcus, who died in a car accident, how she'd been angry for so long that life could be so unfair. I told her about Rebecca, about the brutal 18 months of treatment, about how I still sometimes set the table for 4 before remembering. We talked about the guilt that came with even considering dating again, the feeling that somehow moving forward meant leaving them behind. Rebecca made me promise to keep living, I said quietly, surprising myself with the admission, but I didn't really understand what she meant until recently. I think she knew I'd turn into this hermit version of myself if I didn't have a push. Sarah reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. "Marcus told me something similar. He said life was too short to waste it being afraid. Which is ironic, given the circumstances, but I think I finally get it." We stayed at that restaurant until they started putting chairs up on tables. We talked about our favorite books, our worst teaching disasters, our kids' quirks and brilliance. Sarah had this laugh that started quiet and then built into something infectious. I found myself telling stories I hadn't shared in years, remembering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. When we finally walked out into the cool Portland night, I didn't want the evening to end. "This was really nice," Sarah said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice, like maybe she hadn't expected to actually enjoy herself either. "Would you maybe want to do this again sometime? Without our kids orchestrating it?" I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "I'd really like that," I said. We exchanged numbers, actual numbers that we put in ourselves, and then she hugged me goodbye. A brief warm moment that felt both natural and significant. When I got home, Emma and Jake were waiting on the couch, pretending to watch TV but obviously waiting to ambush me with questions. I walked in, hung up my jacket, and looked at them with what I hoped was a stern expression. "You two," I said slowly, "are the sneakiest, most manipulative children in the entire Pacific Northwest." Emma's face fell slightly, worried she'd crossed a line. Then I broke into a smile. "And I love you for it." "Thank you." The relief and joy on their faces was something I'd treasure forever. Emma rushed over and hugged me, asking a million questions about the date. Jake was more reserved, but clearly pleased with himself. I told them about the evening, about discovering the three-way conspiracy, about how Sarah and I had talked for hours. "Are you going to see her again?" Jake asked, and I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I started seeing each other regularly. We'd meet for coffee between classes, have dinner at quiet restaurants, go for walks along the river. She introduced me to Lily, a smart and funny 15-year-old, who clearly adored her mom and was cautiously optimistic about me. I introduced her properly to Emma and Jake, who acted like they'd won the lottery at their matchmaking success. The four of them got along remarkably well, which felt like its own kind of miracle, but it wasn't always easy. There were moments when guilt would crash over me like a wave. I'd be laughing at something, Sarah said, and suddenly feel Rebecca's absence. So acutely it physically hurt. One night, about 2 months in, I broke down and told Sarah I wasn't sure I could do this. We were sitting in my car after a movie, and I just started crying. All the grief and confusion pouring out. "I feel like I'm betraying her," I said. "Like by being happy with you, I'm somehow saying what we had didn't matter." Sarah didn't try to fix it or tell me I was wrong. She just listened, and when I was done, she shared her own struggles with the same feelings. "I think they'd want us to be happy," she said softly. "But I also think it's okay that it's hard. We don't have to have it all figured out." That honesty, that willingness to sit in the messy, complicated middle of things, meant everything to me. 6 months into our relationship, something beautiful started happening. Our kids began to blend into something that felt like a family. Emma and Lily were already inseparable. Jake and Lily bonded over their shared love of photography. Sunday dinners became a regular thing. All 5 of us crowded around my dining table or Sarah's, cooking together and laughing. It wasn't replacing what we'd lost. It was creating something new alongside it. One Saturday, almost a year after that first date, we all went to the coast together. As I watched our 3 kids running along the beach, chasing waves and collecting shells, Sarah slipped her hand into mine. "Our kids are pretty smart, huh?" she said, and I laughed. Terrifyingly smart. "I'm a little worried about what they'll orchestrate next." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we stood there watching the ocean, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long. I felt whole, not in the way I'd been whole with Rebecca, but in a new way that honored what was and embraced what could be. That evening, as we drove home in the fading light, Emma asked from the back seat, "Dad, are you glad we made that profile?" I looked at her in the rearview mirror, at Jake beside her, at Sarah in the passenger seat with Lily dozing on her shoulder. "Yeah, Emma," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm really glad, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Love doesn't run out when we lose someone. It doesn't betray the past when it opens to the future. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of honoring the love we've lost is allowing ourselves to love again." Rebecca wanted me to keep living, and with Sarah, with our beautifully blended family, I finally understood what that meant. It meant showing up, being vulnerable, taking risks on connection even when it scared me. It meant letting my kids see that grief and joy can coexist, that starting again doesn't mean forgetting what came before. What started as a joke, a well-meaning scheme by teenagers who wanted better for their parents, became something none of us expected. It became a second chance at happiness. It became proof that love can find us even in the midst of loss, that families can be built in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes our children understand what we need before we do ourselves. Those kids saw past our fear and our grief to the possibility that was waiting on the other side of taking a chance. If you're holding back from something because you're afraid or because it feels like a betrayal of what was, I hope this story gives you permission to try anyway. Kindness comes in many forms. Sometimes it's grand gestures, but sometimes it's teenage kids who love their parents enough to meddle in their lives. Sometimes it's showing up for a date you didn't ask for and being willing to be surprised. And sometimes it's giving yourself permission to write a new chapter, while still honoring every word of the ones that came before. We'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Have you ever experienced an unexpected kindness that changed your life? Share your story with our Soul Light Stories family, because every act of love, no matter how small or unconventional, deserves to be celebrated.